"You're nothing but a burden now, mother." My son Michael said those words standing in my kitchen on a cold March evening, the same kitchen where I'd baked his birthday cakes for 40 years. The fluorescent light buzzed overhead, casting harsh shadows across the chipped linoleum floor I'd been meaning to replace, but never could afford. Rain drummed against the window like it was trying to warn me, but the warning came too late. I'm Sarah Elizabeth Parker, 72 years old, retired elementary school teacher from Maple Grove, Ohio, widow for 11 years, mother to 3 children who, until that moment, I believed I'd raised with love and integrity. But standing there watching my middle-aged son point his finger at me like I was one of his incompetent employees, I realized I'd been living inside a story I'd written for myself, one that had absolutely nothing to do with the truth unfolding before my eyes. My husband James died suddenly in 2014. Heart attack. No warning. Just gone at 64. Stolen from me while I still had so much left to say. The grief nearly destroyed me, but I did what women of my generation do. I kept moving forward. I had to. The mortgage wasn't paid off. The house needed constant repairs, and my children needed their mother to stay strong, even though they were grown with families of their own. I'd always been the quiet one in our family, the peacemaker, the one who smoothed over conflicts and made everyone comfortable at holiday dinners. Saint Sarah, James used to call me with that teasing smile. Always putting everyone else first? I thought it was a compliment. I thought my silence was strength, that my ability to absorb pain without complaint made me a good wife, a good mother. I was wrong about so many things. After James died, I threw myself into keeping the house running. I taught piano lessons to neighborhood children for extra income. I volunteered at the church food bank every Wednesday. I babysat my grandchildren whenever Michael or my daughter Emily needed help. I sent birthday cards with checks I couldn't really afford. I drove 3 hours each way to visit my youngest son, Christopher, at his new job in Columbus, even though he never once made the trip to see me. I convinced myself this was what love looked like: constant giving, endless availability, silent sacrifice. But somewhere along the way, my children stopped seeing me as a person. I became a function, a resource to be managed, and eventually discarded when I was no longer useful. It happened so gradually, I didn't even notice. First, Michael stopped calling unless he needed something. Then Emily began making decisions about family gatherings without consulting me, treating my home like a free venue she could book or cancel at will. Christopher simply disappeared into his new life, sending obligatory text messages on holidays that felt copy-pasted and hollow. The night Michael called me a burden, he'd come over with his wife Jessica to discuss the situation. They sat across from me at my own dining table like I was being called into the principal's office. Jessica had her laptop open, spreadsheets glowing on the screen. Michael wore his corporate face, the one he used when firing people. "We need to talk about your living arrangement," Michael began, not even pretending to ease into it. "This house is too much for you to handle alone. The property taxes keep going up. You're on a fixed income. It doesn't make financial sense anymore." Financial sense? As if my entire life could be reduced to a column of numbers on Jessica's spreadsheet. "I'm managing just fine," I said quietly, folding my hands on the table to keep them from shaking. Jessica jumped in, her voice dripping with false sympathy. "Sarah, we're worried about you. This house is falling apart. The roof needs work. The furnace is ancient. What happens when something major breaks and you can't afford to fix it? We're thinking of your well-being." My well-being. The phrase tasted bitter, even though I didn't say it out loud. "What exactly are you suggesting?" I asked, though some deep part of me already knew. Michael glanced at Jessica, then back at me. We think it's time to sell. We've already talked to a realtor. The market's good right now. We could get a decent price, use the money to move you into a nice senior apartment. Somewhere manageable. You'd have less to worry about. This is my home, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. Your father and I built this house. You were raised here. This is where Dad died, Michael interrupted, his tone sharp now. Where you're stuck living in the past, refusing to accept reality. You can barely keep up with maintenance. The yard's a mess. You're isolated out here. It's not healthy. The yard. He was criticizing my yard, the same yard where I'd pushed him on the swing set James built, where we'd planted tomatoes together every summer, where he'd learned to ride his bike. Now it was evidence of my failure, proof that I couldn't be trusted to manage my own life. I don't want to sell, I said firmly, finding some steel in my spine. This house is mine. It's paid for. I'm not going anywhere. That's when Michael's mask slipped. His face hardened, jaw clenched, and he leaned forward with barely contained anger. You're being selfish and stubborn. We're trying to help you, but you won't listen. You never listen. You just do whatever you want without thinking about how it affects the rest of us. How does me living in my own house affect you? I asked, genuinely confused. Jessica closed her laptop with a sharp click. Because when something happens to you, we're the ones who have to deal with it. When you fall and break your hip because you're too proud to admit you need help, we're the ones who'll have to drop everything and take care of you. You're making your problems our responsibility. The room fell silent, except for the ticking of the wall clock, the same clock that had marked time through thousands of family meals, homework sessions, quiet evenings with James. I looked at my son, really looked at him, and saw a stranger wearing my child's face. When had he become so cold? When had my sacrifices transformed into obligations he resented? I think you should leave, I said softly. Michael stood abruptly, chair scraping against the floor. Fine. But when you can't handle things anymore, don't come crying to us. You've made your choice. That I have, I replied, standing to face him. I've chosen to stay in my own home. I've chosen not to be bullied by my own son. His face flushed red. Bullied. Are you serious right now? We're trying to help you, and this is the thanks we get. You're impossible, Mother. You've done nothing but take from this family your entire life. You took Dad's best years. You took our childhoods because you were always too busy with your students to pay attention to us. And now you want to take our peace of mind by refusing to be practical about your situation. The words hit me like physical blows. Each one landed with precision, targeting every insecurity I'd ever had about my parenting, my marriage, my worth as a human being. I stood there absorbing them, just like I'd been trained to do my entire life. Jessica grabbed her coat. Let's go, Michael. She clearly doesn't want our help. At the door, Michael turned back one last time. You have 2 weeks to think about it. After that, we're moving forward with or without your cooperation. Emily and Christopher agree with us. You're outvoted. Then they were gone, leaving me standing in my kitchen with those words echoing in the sudden silence. You've done nothing but take from this family your entire life. I walked slowly to the living room and sat in James's old recliner, the one I'd never been able to bring myself to throw away. The house settled around me, creaking and sighing like it was exhausted from holding up so many years of memories. I didn't cry. Not yet. I was too stunned, too busy replaying the conversation in my mind, trying to understand how I'd become the villain in my own children's story. I thought about all those years of packing lunches, attending school plays, sitting through baseball games in the rain. I thought about working 2 jobs after James's hours got cut at the factory. I thought about the countless times I'd put their needs before my own, their dreams before mine, their comfort before any consideration of what I might want or need. And somehow, in their minds, that made me a taker. The next morning, I called Emily. Surely my daughter would understand, would see reason, would remember all the times I'd been there for her. She answered on the fourth ring, her voice distracted. Mum, I can't really talk right now. I'm in the middle of something. Michael came by last night, I said, about selling the house. A pause. Oh, yeah, we've all been discussing it. It's really for the best, Mum. My heart sank. Emily, this is my home. I'm not ready to give it up. Nobody's asking you to give it up, she said, irritation creeping into her tone. We're asking you to be realistic. You're 72. You can't maintain that house by yourself. And frankly, we don't have the time or money to keep helping you with repairs. I never asked you to. You don't have to ask. We're your children. It's assumed. But Michael's right. You're making your problems our problems, and some of us have our own families to worry about. Some of us. As if I wasn't really family anymore, just an obligation they were stuck with. I see, I said quietly. Look, I have to go. Think about what Michael said. Really think about it. We're not trying to hurt you, Mum. We're trying to help before things get worse. She hung up before I could respond. I sat there holding the phone, listening to the dial tone, wondering when exactly I'd lost my children. Or maybe I never really had them at all. Maybe I'd been so busy trying to be everything they needed that I'd forgotten to teach them how to see me as a person instead of a service provider. I called Christopher last, hoping my youngest might be different. He'd always been the sensitive one, the artist, the child who wrote me poetry on Mother's Day instead of buying cards. Hey, Mum, he answered warmly. What's up? Relief flooded through me. Christopher, I need to talk to you about something important. Sure. Shoot. I explained the situation, Michael's visit, the pressure to sell. As I spoke, the silence on the other end grew heavier. Finally, Christopher sighed. Mum, I hate to say this, but maybe they have a point. That house is a lot for one person, and you're not getting any younger. I'm 72, not 90, I said, hearing the defensiveness in my voice. I know, but things happen fast at your age. My friend's mom fell in her house and wasn't found for 2 days. It's scary, Mum. We just want you to be safe. Safe. Controlled. Managed. All words that sounded like care but felt like chains. So you agree with Michael? I asked, already knowing the answer. I think we all need to sit down and talk about this like adults. Figure out what's best for everyone. Everyone except me, apparently. I have to go, I said. Thanks for your time. Mum, don't be like that. I hung up. For a long moment, I sat in the kitchen staring at nothing, processing the reality that my 3 children had held meetings about me, made decisions about my future, and agreed I was too much of a burden to consult. They'd discussed selling my house, relocating me, managing my life, and not once had anyone considered asking me what I wanted. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, James's side of the mattress still carrying the slight depression from his body even after all these years. I thought about my marriage, my children, the decades I'd spent believing that service equaled love, that sacrifice meant something, that eventually my quiet devotion would be recognized and valued. But it hadn't been. Instead, I'd raised adults who saw me as an inconvenience, a problem to be solved, an asset to be liquidated. And the worst part was realizing I'd trained them to see me this way. Every time I said, "Don't worry about me," every time I accepted less than I deserved, every time I swallowed my hurt and anger to keep the peace, I'd taught them that my needs didn't matter. I'd made myself invisible, and now they couldn't see me at all. Around 3 in the morning, something shifted inside me. I got out of bed, pulled on my robe, and walked through the dark house. I ran my hand along the walls James and I had painted together. I stood in each child's old bedroom, remembering who they used to be before they became who they are now. I touched the counter where I'd rolled out thousands of cookies, the windowsill where I'd kept my African violets, the door frame where we'd marked the children's heights year after year. This house wasn't just property. It was proof that I'd existed, that I'd built something, that my life had substance and meaning beyond what I could provide for others. And they wanted to erase it, sell it, turn my entire existence into a transaction that benefited them. Standing in the pre-dawn darkness of my living room, I made a decision. I wasn't going anywhere. This house was mine. My life was mine. And if my children wanted to fight me, they were about to discover that quiet women aren't weak women. They were about to learn that silence isn't surrender. It's the calm before the storm. The letter arrived on a Tuesday, delivered by a courier who made me sign for it. Official-looking envelope, law firm return address I didn't recognize. My hands shook as I opened it, some instinct warning me that whatever was inside would change everything. Notice of legal guardianship petition, the header read. I had to read it 3 times before the words made sense. Michael, Emily, and Christopher had filed a petition to have me declared legally incompetent. They'd hired a lawyer. They'd gathered documentation. They'd scheduled a court hearing. And they'd done it all without telling me. The document was cold, clinical, devastating. It claimed I suffered from diminished mental capacity and inability to manage personal and financial affairs. It referenced concerning behavior patterns, including paranoia, financial confusion, and refusal to accept necessary assistance from family members. It suggested I was a danger to myself and required immediate intervention for my own protection. I sat down hard on the kitchen chair, the paper trembling in my grip. They were trying to take everything, not just the house, my autonomy, my dignity, my basic right to control my own life. If this petition succeeded, one of them would become my legal guardian with the power to make every decision for me. Where I lived, how I spent my money, what medical treatments I received, whether I could drive, vote, sign contracts, or even choose what to eat for dinner. They were trying to erase me as a legal person. The evidence they'd compiled was a masterpiece of manipulation. Doctor's visits, where I'd apparently seemed confused about dates. Visits I remembered clearly, where Michael had answered questions before I could speak. Financial concerns about unpaid bills, bills I'd actually paid on time, but they'd somehow obtained my banking records to cherry-pick transactions. Testimony from neighbors about my increasingly erratic behavior, probably referring to the time I'd gotten angry when the mailman repeatedly delivered packages to the wrong address. Every normal moment of my life had been twisted, reframed, documented as proof of my incompetence. And the most damning part was they'd been building this case for months, maybe years. Every visit where Michael asked pointed questions about my memory. Every time Emily expressed exaggerated concern about my health. Every phone call where Christopher gently suggested I might be forgetting things. They hadn't been worried about me. They'd been building evidence against me. The hearing was scheduled for 3 weeks away. 3 weeks to find a lawyer, mount a defense, and prove I was competent to a judge who would be looking at a carefully constructed narrative of decline and confusion. 3 weeks to fight my own children in court for the right to remain myself. I called Michael first, fury overriding my shock. He answered on the second ring, his voice professionally neutral. "Hello, Mother." "You're trying to have me declared incompetent?" I said, my voice shaking with rage I'd never allowed myself to feel before. "You're taking me to court?" A long pause. "We had hoped it wouldn't come to this, but you left us no choice." "No choice? I left you no choice." I was shouting now, years of suppressed anger pouring out. "I said no to selling my house, so you're trying to have me declared legally insane?" "That's not what this is," Michael said calmly, which somehow made it worse. "We're concerned about your well-being. You're showing signs of cognitive decline. The other night you were paranoid, defensive, irrational. We can't stand by and watch you deteriorate." "I was defending my right to live in my own home." "You were being unreasonable," he corrected. "And this kind of emotional outburst just proves our point. You're not thinking clearly, Mum. You need help, whether you realize it or not." The gaslighting was so smooth, so practiced, I almost questioned myself. Almost. But I'd seen the document. I'd read the lies. I knew exactly what they were doing. "How could you?" I whispered, the fight draining out of me into something colder, harder. "How could you do this to your own mother?" "We're doing this for you," Michael insisted. "One day you'll understand that. One day you'll thank us." I hung up without another word. Emily sent a text an hour later. "Mum, please don't make this harder than it has to be. We all love you and want what's best. Fighting this will only hurt everyone, especially you." Christopher called that evening, his voice soft with manufactured empathy. "Mum, I know you're upset, but this is really for your protection. We've consulted with experts. They all agree you need help managing things. Please don't fight us on this. Just let us take care of you. Let us take care of you." The phrase that had haunted my entire life, always meaning "let us control you" in disguise. I didn't respond to either of them. Instead, I did something I should have done years ago. I started documenting everything. I pulled out my checkbook and organized every financial record for the past 5 years. Paid on time, balanced to the penny, not a single missed payment or error. I printed my medical records from my doctor, showing routine checkups with no cognitive concerns noted. I gathered letters I'd written, emails I'd sent, proving my mind was sharp and clear. Then I found something I hadn't been looking for. In a box of old papers, I discovered a folder labeled Estate Planning Confidential. Inside were documents dated from 2 years ago, right after James died. A proposed revision to James's will that I'd never signed. A power of attorney form with my signature, except I'd never signed any such document. A medical evaluation claiming I was showing early signs of dementia from a doctor I'd never met. They'd been planning this for years. Since James died, maybe longer. They'd forged documents, fabricated evidence, and laid the groundwork to take everything the moment I showed any sign of resistance. The house sale was just the trigger. If I'd agreed, they probably would have waited. But the moment I said no, they pulled the trigger on a plan that had been years in the making. My hands shook as I photocopied everything. The forged signatures, the fake medical evaluation, the correspondence between Michael and an attorney discussing Mother's situation and necessary interventions. Every piece of evidence that this wasn't concern, it was conspiracy. The next morning, I called the one person I knew I could trust, my oldest friend, Carol Davis. We'd taught together for years, lost touch after James died because he'd always found reasons I shouldn't socialize. She answered immediately, her voice warm with surprise. Sarah? My God, I thought, well, I didn't know what to think. I need help, I said simply, and I need someone who'll believe me. She came over that afternoon. I showed her everything: the guardianship petition, the forged documents, the timeline of manipulation. She read it all in silence, her face growing harder with each page. Finally, she looked up at me. Sarah, this is elder abuse. This is fraud. Your children aren't trying to protect you. They're trying to steal from you. Hearing someone else say it out loud broke something open inside me. I started crying, years of suppressed pain and confusion, and self-doubt pouring out. Carol held me like we were young teachers again, supporting each other through difficult days. What do I do? I finally asked. You fight, she said firmly. You fight with everything you have, and you don't do it alone. That evening, Carol helped me find an attorney who specialized in elder law and family disputes. Her name was Rachel Bennett, a sharp-eyed woman in her 50s with a reputation for not backing down. We met the next morning in her office downtown. I told her everything, showed her everything. She listened without interrupting, taking notes, her expression growing more severe as the story unfolded. When I finished, she sat back in her chair and looked at me directly. Mrs. Parker, what your children are doing is called financial exploitation and coercive control. The forged documents alone are potentially criminal. But here's what you need to understand. Guardianship cases are hard to fight because the system assumes family members have good intentions. We're going to have to prove not just that you're competent, but that they're acting maliciously. Can we do that? I asked. With this evidence? Absolutely. But it's going to get ugly. They're going to paint you as paranoid, defensive, irrational. They'll use your anger as proof you're unstable. We need to stay calm, organized, and methodical. Can you do that? I thought about all the years I'd stayed calm while being dismissed, diminished, and controlled. All the times I'd swallowed my anger to keep the peace. All the silence I'd maintained, because that's what good women did. I've been doing that my whole life, I said quietly. But this time, I'm doing it for myself. Rachel smiled. Then let's get to work. Over the next 2 weeks, we built a case. Medical evaluations from my actual doctor confirming my mental competence. Financial records proving my capability. Testimony from Carol and other friends about my sharp mind and independent functioning. Analysis of the forged documents. A private investigator's report on Michael's financial troubles. Apparently, he'd made some bad investments and was facing significant debt. Suddenly, the rush to sell my house made perfect sense. They didn't want to protect me. They wanted my equity to solve their problems. The night before the hearing, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed thinking about how I'd gotten here, tracing the path from devoted mother to legal adversary of my own children. And I realized that in some ways, I'd always known something was wrong. The way they'd minimize my feelings, the way they'd speak over me, the way they'd treated my opinions as suggestions they could ignore. I'd just been too well trained to trust my own perceptions. But that training was breaking down, shattered by the cold reality of legal documents that treated me like property to be managed rather than a person with rights. And in that breaking, something new was emerging. Not anger, though there was plenty of that. Not bitterness, though I had every right to feel it. Clarity. Pure, undeniable clarity about who I was, what I deserved, and what I was willing to do to protect it. I got out of bed and walked through my house one more time. Tomorrow, I'd walk into that courtroom and fight for the right to keep it. But win or lose, I knew something my children hadn't counted on. I wasn't the woman they thought they could erase. I was the woman who'd raised them, which meant I knew exactly how they thought, exactly how they'd attack, and exactly where their weaknesses were. They wanted a fight. They were about to get one from someone who'd spent 72 years learning patience, strategy, and the power of quiet persistence. They'd mistaken my silence for weakness. They were about to learn how wrong they were. The morning after I hired Rachel Bennett, I did something I hadn't done in years. I went to the bank and demanded to see every account record, every signature card, every document with my name on it. The young banker looked confused when I insisted on reviewing everything personally, not trusting their printouts or summaries. "Is there a problem with your accounts, Mrs. Parker?" she asked carefully. "I don't know yet," I replied. "That's what I'm here to find out." What I discovered in those files made my blood run cold. 6 months ago, Michael had been added as a joint account holder on my savings account, the one where James's life insurance money sat untouched. The signature authorizing this looked like mine, but wasn't quite right. The date corresponded to a doctor's appointment Michael had driven me to, where he'd insisted I was too tired to wait afterward and should sign some papers quickly. I'd signed something that day. He'd told me it was just an updated contact form for my medical records. It wasn't. I asked for copies of everything, every transaction, every signature, every change made to my accounts in the past 3 years. The banker hesitated, then complied when I calmly explained that I was gathering evidence for a legal proceeding. Her eyes widened slightly, but she remained professional. Walking out of that bank with a folder thick with evidence, I felt something I hadn't felt in decades. Powerful. Not in a domineering way, but in the quiet assurance that I knew the truth and had proof to back it up. Carol met me for lunch at the diner downtown. She took one look at my face and smiled. "You found something?" "Everything," I said, sliding the folder across the table. "Bank fraud, forged signatures, unauthorized access. He's been stealing from me for months, maybe longer." She flipped through the papers, her expression growing darker. "Sarah, this is serious. This isn't just a family dispute anymore." "I know," I said calmly. "Rachel says we can file criminal charges if we want to. But first, we need to stop the guardianship petition. Once that's done, then we decide about the rest." Carol reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "I'm proud of you. You could have just rolled over, let them put you in some facility, disappeared quietly. Instead, you're fighting back." "I'm too old to disappear quietly," I replied, "and too angry to go gently." Over the next week, Rachel and I worked like investigators building a case. She hired a handwriting analyst who confirmed the signatures on several documents weren't mine. She obtained my complete medical records, which showed zero evidence of cognitive decline. In fact, my doctor's notes repeatedly mentioned my sharp recall and clear thinking. We also discovered something else. Michael had taken out a home equity line of credit against his own house and was facing foreclosure. Emily's husband had lost his job 6 months ago. Christopher's art studio was bleeding money. Every one of my children was in financial crisis, and my house, worth nearly $500,000 in the current market, represented the solution to all their problems. "They need your money," Rachel said bluntly during one of our meetings. "That's what this is really about. They've dressed it up as concern, but it's financial desperation." "So I'm just an asset to be liquidated," I said, the words tasting bitter. "To them? Yes. But to the court, you're a person with rights, and we're going to prove that." Rachel suggested something that made me uncomfortable at first: recording my interactions with my children. If they say anything that proves they're motivated by money rather than concern, we need it on record, but only if you're comfortable with it. I thought about all the times they'd lied to my face, manipulated conversations, twisted my words against me. I'm comfortable with it. The next time Michael called, I was ready. I'd set up a recording app on my phone, completely legal in Ohio as long as one party consents, and I was that party. Mum, we need to talk about your attitude, he began without preamble. Your lawyer contacted our attorney. This is getting out of hand. I'm defending myself against a baseless guardianship petition, I said calmly. That's not attitude. That's rights. You're making this so much harder than it needs to be, he said, frustration bleeding through. If you'd just cooperate, this could all be settled quietly. But you're being stubborn and paranoid, which frankly just proves our point about your mental state. What point is that? I asked, keeping my voice level. That you can't see what's in your own best interest. That you need help making decisions. That you're... He paused, recalculating. That you're not yourself anymore. I'm exactly myself, I replied. That's what bothers you. I'm not the version of me you can control. Nobody's trying to control you, Mum. We're trying to protect you from making terrible decisions that will hurt you. Like refusing to sell my house so you can pay off your foreclosure? Silence. Long, heavy silence. How did you... He caught himself. That's not relevant. It's completely relevant. You're facing foreclosure. Emily's husband is unemployed. Christopher's business is failing. You all need money, and my house is worth $500,000. That's what this is about. You don't know what you're talking about, Michael said, anger replacing the false concern. You have no idea what we're dealing with. Then enlighten me. Another pause. When he spoke again, his voice was cold. Fine. Yes, I'm having financial difficulties. Yes, it would help if we could access your assets. But that doesn't change the fact that you're not capable of managing your own affairs anymore. You're confused, paranoid, making accusations that don't make sense. This conversation is just proving that we're right to pursue guardianship. I'll see you in court, I said, and hung up. I sat there trembling, not from fear, but from adrenaline. I'd stood up to him. I'd called out his lies. I'd refused to be gaslit or manipulated. And I had every word recorded. Rachel was delighted when I played her the recording. This is perfect. He essentially admitted financial motivation while trying to pathologize your reasonable responses. The judge will see right through this. But we weren't done preparing. Rachel wanted testimony from people who could verify my competence and independence. Carol agreed immediately. So did my neighbor, Mrs. Anderson, who'd watched me manage my property efficiently for years. My doctor wrote a letter stating unequivocally that I showed no signs of dementia or cognitive impairment. We also found something unexpected. A blog post Michael had written 2 years ago on a personal finance website, complaining about being stuck financially supporting aging parents who refused to downsize or sell assets that could fund their own care. He'd used fake names, but the details were unmistakably about me. He's been planning this for years, I said, reading the post again. He's been resentful for years. People show you who they are, Rachel said gently. You're just finally in a position to see it clearly. The week before the hearing, Emily called. Her voice was different, softer, more emotional, more desperate. Mom, please, she began. Can we talk? Just you and me? I'm listening. This has gotten so out of control. It was never supposed to be like this. We were just worried about you. But Michael's made it into this whole legal thing, and now everyone's hiring lawyers, and it's too much. Then drop the petition, I said simply. I can't. Michael won't. And if I don't support him, he'll... She stopped. He'll what, Emily? Nothing. Never mind. He'll cut you off from whatever money he's planning to get from selling my house, I finished. That's what you meant, isn't it? You're not supporting this because you believe I'm incompetent. You're supporting it because you're afraid of your brother. She was crying now. You don't understand the pressure we're under. The bills, the debt, the constant stress. We just need help, Mom. We need you to help us. I've been helping you your whole lives, I said quietly. I've given everything I had. But I won't give up my independence and dignity. That's not help. That's sacrifice at the altar of your convenience. Please, she whispered. Please don't make us go to court. Please just sign the papers and let us handle things. We'll take care of you, I promise. Your promises don't mean what they used to, I said, and ended the call. That night, I lay in bed, thinking about my daughter's tears. Part of me, the old part, the mother part, wanted to fix her pain, solve her problems, sacrifice myself to make her life easier. But another part, the part that was growing stronger every day, knew that giving in now would mean erasing myself completely. Sometimes love means saying no. Sometimes it means letting people face the consequences of their choices. Sometimes it means choosing yourself, even when it breaks your heart. The night before the hearing, I did something symbolic. I took down all the family photos in the living room, the carefully curated images of holidays and graduations and weddings, where we all smiled like we were happy. I put them in a box in the closet, not out of spite or revenge, but because I needed to see my walls without those false narratives covering them. Then I hung something new, a photo of me and James from before we had children, young and laughing at some long-forgotten joke. Me as a young teacher, surrounded by students. Me receiving an award for 30 years of service to the school district. Images of myself as a person, not just as someone's mother or wife. I looked at those photos and felt something shift. These people, the young teacher, the dedicated professional, the woman who'd built a life, they were still in me. I'd just buried them under decades of putting everyone else first. Carol came over that evening. We didn't talk much, just sat together drinking tea. Finally, she said, "Whatever happens tomorrow, you've already won. You know that, right?" "How do you figure?" "Because you're not their mother anymore," she said. "You're Sarah. You've stopped being what they needed and started being who you are. That's the bravest thing I've ever seen." I squeezed her hand. "I'm terrified." "Good," she replied. "That means it matters." That night, I slept better than I had in weeks. Not because I wasn't afraid of what tomorrow would bring, but because I knew I'd done everything I could. I'd gathered evidence. I'd built a case. I'd assembled witnesses. I'd prepared for battle. And most importantly, I'd stopped apologizing for taking up space in my own life. The morning of the hearing, I dressed carefully. Navy suit, simple jewelry, hair pulled back neatly. Professional, competent, unshakable. Rachel had coached me on courtroom demeanor. Stay calm, answer questions directly, don't get emotional even if they provoke you. "They're going to try to rattle you," she'd warned. "They'll bring up every mistake you've made, every moment of confusion, every time you forgot something minor. They'll try to make you look weak. Don't give them that satisfaction." I looked at myself in the mirror. The woman staring back wasn't the same person who'd opened that legal notice 2 weeks ago. She'd been transformed by anger into something stronger. Not hardened, not bitter, but crystallized into absolute clarity. My children thought they were facing the soft, compliant mother they'd always known. They were about to meet someone entirely different, someone who'd been waiting her whole life to stop being quiet and start being heard. The courtroom was smaller than I'd imagined, wood-panelled and fluorescent lit, with uncomfortable wooden benches and the faint smell of old paper and institutional coffee. I sat beside Rachel at the defendant's table, though I hated that word, defendant, as if I'd done something wrong by existing and wanting to remain myself. Across the aisle, Michael sat with his attorney, a sharp-suited man named Thomas Sullivan, who looked like he specialized in making reasonable things sound dangerous. Emily sat behind them, not making eye contact. Christopher hadn't come, sending a written statement instead. Another act of cowardice dressed up as consideration. The judge, Honor Helen Morrison, was a woman in her mid-60s with steel grey hair and reading glasses perched on her nose. She reviewed the case file in silence while we waited, the only sound the clock on the wall ticking away seconds that felt like hours. Finally, she looked up. "This is a petition for guardianship based on alleged diminished mental capacity. Mr. Sullivan, you may present your case." Michael's attorney stood, smoothing his tie. "Your Honor, we're here today because a loving family is desperately concerned about their mother's declining cognitive abilities and her refusal to accept the help she needs. The petitioners have documented numerous instances of confusion, financial mismanagement, and increasingly paranoid behavior that suggest Mrs. Parker is no longer capable of making sound decisions regarding her own welfare." He presented their evidence methodically. The doctor's visit, where I'd supposedly been confused about dates. Failing to mention Michael had been answering questions for me. The unpaid bills, cherry-picked from months ago when I'd disputed a charge and temporarily withheld payment until it was resolved. Testimony from a neighbour who'd seen me wandering my own yard at odd hours. Actually, I'd been watching for raccoons getting into the garbage. Every normal moment of my life, twisted into evidence of incompetence. Then he called Michael to testify. My son walked to the stand, looking appropriately concerned, shoulders slightly slumped, voice gentle, the picture of a devoted child doing a painful duty. "Mr. Parker, can you describe your mother's recent behavior?" Sullivan asked. Michael sighed heavily. "It's been heartbreaking to watch. She forgets conversations we've had. She gets defensive when we try to help. She's made accusations that don't make sense, claiming we're trying to steal from her when we're just trying to ensure she's taken care of. Last month, she insisted someone had broken into her house, but nothing was missing or disturbed. She's becoming paranoid and isolated." I wanted to stand up and scream that the break-in was him using his old key without permission, but Rachel touched my arm gently. "Wait." "And her financial management?" Sullivan prompted. "She's paid some bills twice and forgotten others entirely. She doesn't understand online banking. She recently closed an account I'd been helping her manage and became hostile when I asked why. I'm worried she's going to make a major mistake that puts her in financial jeopardy." The account he'd added himself to without my permission. The one where he'd been slowly draining funds. But he made it sound like concerned assistance. Sullivan thanked him and sat down. Rachel stood slowly, adjusting her glasses, letting the silence stretch. "Mr. Parker, you testified your mother is financially confused. Are you aware she's maintained a balanced checkbook for 47 years without a single overdraft?" Michael shifted. "That's not. The issue isn't past competence. It's current decline." "Current decline," Rachel repeated. "Like closing the account you had access to?" "I was helping her manage without her knowledge or explicit permission, correct? You were added to that account 6 months ago. Can you describe the circumstances?" Michael's jaw tightened. She was tired after a doctor's appointment. I helped her with the paperwork. Did you tell her the paperwork was to add you as a joint account holder with full withdrawal rights? It was implied. Implied? Rachel said flatly. She pulled out a document. This is the signature card from that transaction. Your Honor, we've had this signature analyzed. It's not Mrs. Parker's authentic signature. Murmurs in the courtroom. Michael's face flushed. That's ridiculous. She signed it herself. Did she? Or did you forge her signature after she'd already left the bank? Objection. Sullivan stood quickly. This is character assassination, not relevant to the guardianship question. Your Honor, it's entirely relevant, Rachel countered. The petitioner claims financial concern for his mother while simultaneously committing bank fraud against her. His motivation isn't protection, it's access to assets. Judge Morrison looked at Michael coldly. I'll allow it. Mr. Parker, answer the question. Michael fumbled, looking to his attorney for help. She was confused. I was helping. I might have assisted with the signature because her hand was shaking. Assisted with the signature, Rachel repeated, also known as forgery. She pulled out another document. Mr. Parker, are you currently facing foreclosure on your home? His eyes widened. That's personal. Financial. Answer the question. Yes, he admitted quietly. And would the sale of your mother's house, worth approximately $480,000, resolve your financial difficulties? This isn't about money. No? Rachel pulled out printed pages. This is a blog post you wrote 2 years ago complaining about parents who refuse to liquidate assets to fund their own care. You described this as selfish and burdensome to adult children. Is this your post? Michael stared at the papers, trapped. I was venting. You didn't mean to document your financial resentment toward your mother 2 years before petitioning to control her assets. Rachel let that hang in the air. No further questions. Michael left the stand looking smaller, diminished. Emily was crying quietly in the gallery. Good. Let them feel what they'd been trying to do to me. Then it was my turn to testify. I walked to the stand on steady legs, placed my hand on the Bible, and swore to tell the truth. I'd been telling the truth all along. Finally, someone was listening. Rachel started gently. Mrs. Parker, can you tell us about your current living situation? I live independently in the home my husband and I built in 1978. I maintain the property, manage my finances, and volunteer regularly in my community. I'm in good health, both physically and mentally. The petition claims you've shown signs of confusion and memory issues. Can you address that? I looked directly at the judge. Your Honor, I've been confused. Confused about why my son was answering my doctor's questions for me. Confused about why bills I'd paid were being reported as unpaid. Confused about why my children were holding meetings about my future without including me. But that's not cognitive confusion. That's reasonable bewilderment at being manipulated. Can you describe what happened when your children first approached you about selling your house? I took a breath. They came to my home unannounced with a real estate listing and a sales plan. They didn't ask if I wanted to sell. They told me I was going to sell. When I refused, they told me I was being selfish and irrational. They said I'd done nothing but take from the family my whole life. My voice cracked slightly, but I pushed through. I've spent 50 years putting my children first. I worked 2 jobs to pay for their education. I sacrificed my own dreams to support theirs. And the moment I said no to something they wanted, I became incompetent in their eyes. What do you want, Mrs. Parker? I want to live in my own home, make my own decisions, and be treated like a person instead of an asset to be managed or a problem to be solved. I want my children to remember that I'm their mother, not their property. Rachel yielded to cross-examination. Sullivan approached carefully, trying to look sympathetic. Mrs. Parker, isn't it true that maintaining a large house at your age is physically demanding? I'm 72, not 90. I exercise daily, walk 2 miles every morning, and garden regularly. I'm in better physical condition than many people half my age. But don't you worry about falling, having an emergency, being alone? I have a medical alert system, a cell phone, and neighbors who check on me. I'm no more at risk than any other independent adult. Your children testified they're concerned about your welfare. My children testified they're concerned about their welfare, I interrupted. About their foreclosure, their unemployment, their debt. This petition isn't about my needs. It's about theirs. Sullivan looked uncomfortable. You're not being fair to... Fair? I leaned forward slightly. Is it fair to forge my signature? To build a case against me based on lies? To try to take away my basic human rights because I won't fund their financial mistakes? I don't think you want to discuss what's fair. He had no response to that. No further questions. Then came our witnesses. Carol testified about my sharp mind and independent functioning, providing examples of complex conversations we'd had, problems I'd helped her solve, the detailed planning I'd done for community events. My doctor testified unequivocally. Mrs. Parker shows 0 signs of dementia or cognitive impairment. She scores perfectly on cognitive assessments. Her memory is excellent. In fact, she often corrects details in her medical history that less attentive patients would forget. Mrs. Anderson, my neighbor, testified about seeing me manage my property efficiently, handle contractor negotiations, and navigate complex home repairs with complete competence. The handwriting analyst testified that the signatures on 3 key documents weren't mine. Finally, Rachel played the recording of my conversation with Michael, his admission of financial difficulties, his dismissal of my concerns as paranoia, his statement that accessing your assets would help him. The courtroom was silent as his voice echoed through the speakers, damning himself with his own words. Judge Morrison called a brief recess. When we returned, her face was set in granite. I've reviewed the evidence and testimony, she began. This is one of the most troubling guardianship petitions I've encountered in 20 years on this bench. Mrs. Parker is clearly competent. In fact, she displays remarkable clarity and self-awareness. The alleged evidence of decline is contradicted by medical records, witness testimony, and financial documentation. She turned to Michael, her voice cold. What I see here is not concern for a parent's welfare, but financial desperation disguised as care. The forged signatures alone are serious enough to warrant investigation. The manipulation of medical appointments, the misrepresentation of finances, the documented financial motivation. This is elder abuse, Mr. Parker, and I will not be a party to it. Michael's face went white. The petition for guardianship is denied, Judge Morrison continued. Mrs. Parker retains full legal capacity and autonomy. Furthermore, I'm ordering that all accounts where Mr. Parker was added without clear, documented consent be frozen and reviewed. Mrs. Parker, I'm also providing you with information about filing formal complaints for financial exploitation and fraud if you choose to pursue criminal charges. She looked at Michael one more time. You should be ashamed. This woman raised you, and you tried to steal her autonomy for money. Get out of my courtroom. The gavel fell like thunder. Rachel squeezed my hand. You won. But I didn't feel victorious. I felt hollow, exhausted, relieved, and heartbroken all at once. I'd won my freedom, but I'd lost my children. Or rather, I'd finally seen clearly that I'd lost them years ago. Michael left without looking at me. Emily approached hesitantly, tears streaming. Mom, I'm so sorry, I didn't. You did, I said quietly. You knew exactly what you were doing. You just didn't think I'd fight back. She opened her mouth, closed it, and walked away. Carol drove me home. We didn't talk much. When we pulled up to my house, fully and legally mine, I just sat there for a moment. How do you feel? Carol asked. Free, I said, and devastated, and strong, all at once. That sounds about right. I looked at my home, the one I'd fought for, the one that represented everything I'd built and refused to surrender. The lights were on inside. I'd left them on that morning, knowing I'd come home victorious or broken, but either way, I'd come home. I need to be alone tonight, I said. Is that okay? Whatever you need, Carol replied. I'm proud of you. Inside, the house was quiet, not the oppressive silence of loneliness, but the peaceful quiet of a space that belonged to me alone. I made tea, sat at my kitchen table, and let myself feel everything I'd been holding back. The grief of losing my children, even though they'd been lost for years. The relief of being believed. The exhaustion of battle. The strange, unexpected lightness of being free. I'd won. Not just in court, but in the bigger battle. The one against being erased, being controlled, being reduced to someone else's convenience. I'd chosen myself, and I'd survived. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. But tonight, I sat in my own home, in my own life, making my own choices, and that was worth everything. 3 days after the hearing, a formal notice arrived from the bank. Michael's access to all my accounts had been permanently revoked. The funds he'd withdrawn, nearly $14,000 over 6 months, were being investigated as potential fraud. His bank had filed a suspicious activity report. The legal machine was grinding forward, slow and impersonal, but grinding nonetheless. I didn't feel satisfaction, just a weary sort of justice. Emily called once, leaving a voicemail that started with, "Mom, please," and dissolved into crying, before she hung up. I listened to it twice, then deleted it. Maybe someday we'd find a way to talk, but not now. Not while the wound was still fresh and her apology was about her feelings, not my reality. Christopher sent a letter, handwritten 3 pages long. It was full of excuses. He'd trusted Michael's judgment. He'd been too busy with his own problems to look closely. He'd thought he was helping. He said he loved me. He said he was sorry. He said he hoped I could forgive him. I filed the letter in a folder labeled "Maybe Later" and tried not to think about it. Rachel called with updates on the fraud investigation. "The DA is considering charges," she said. "But I want you to understand. This will be public. There will be media attention. Your children will face serious legal consequences. Are you prepared for that?" I sat with the question for a long moment. Was I prepared to see my son arrested, prosecuted, potentially imprisoned? Was I prepared for the neighbors to whisper, for the church ladies to cluck their tongues, for everyone to know my family had fallen apart this spectacularly? "What happens if I don't press charges?" I asked. "He keeps the money. He faces no consequences. And he'll likely do this to someone else." That settled it. "File the charges." "Are you sure?" "He tried to erase me," I said quietly. "He forged my signature, stole my money, and attempted to take away my basic rights as a human being. Yes, he's my son. But that doesn't mean he gets to destroy me without consequences." "Okay," Rachel said. I'll move forward. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about Michael as a little boy, gap-toothed and earnest, bringing me dandelions from the yard, telling me I was the best mom in the whole world. When had that boy transformed into the man who'd tried to steal my life? Or had that man always been there, just hidden beneath a child's dependence? I got up around 2 in the morning and did something I'd been avoiding. I went through the boxes of family photos I'd stored in the closet. Pictures of birthdays, holidays, graduations. Smiling faces that looked genuine, but maybe never were. Or maybe they were genuine then, and something changed. Maybe we all changed, growing in directions that pulled us apart instead of together. I found a photo from Michael's college graduation. He'd insisted I come even though money was tight and the drive was long. I'd been so proud of him, standing there in his cap and gown, the first in our family to earn a degree. I'd sacrificed so much to help him get there. And now, he'd tried to sacrifice me. I put the photos back in the box, not destroying them, not erasing the past, just acknowledging that the story I'd told myself about my family wasn't the whole truth. The next morning, Carol came over with coffee and news. The workshop at the library wants you to come back. They got calls from 7 women asking about scheduling, legal resources, how to document financial abuse. You started something, Sarah. I just told my story, I said. Sometimes that's all it takes. One person being brave enough to speak up, and suddenly everyone realizes they're not alone. We sat on my back porch, watching birds at the feeder. The yard needed work. The grass was too long, the flower beds overgrown. But I didn't mind. It was my mess, my yard, my choice whether to fix it or let it grow wild. What's next for you? Carol asked. I'd been thinking about that question for days. What was next when you'd spent your whole life defined by relationships that had ended or transformed beyond recognition? What was next when you were suddenly, radically free? I want to travel, I said slowly. James always said we'd see the Grand Canyon, but we never made it. I think I'll go. Alone? Maybe. Or maybe I'll see if you want to come. Carol smiled. I'd love that. And I want to keep doing the workshops. Help other women recognize the signs before they lose years like I did. Maybe write everything down. Not for revenge, just for documentation. So other people know they're not imagining things. They're not too sensitive. They're not crazy. They're being manipulated, and it's real. And they deserve to fight back. That sounds like a purpose, Carol said. It feels like one. 2 weeks later, the DA filed formal charges against Michael. Fraud, forgery, financial exploitation of an elderly person. The news spread through town quickly. I stopped going to church because I couldn't handle the pitying looks, the whispered conversations that stopped when I entered rooms. But I started attending a support group for seniors dealing with family financial abuse. There were 12 of us, mostly women, all with similar stories. Children or grandchildren who'd stolen, manipulated, forged, gaslit. We sat in a circle in the community centre and told our truths, and for the first time in my life, I felt completely understood. One woman, Rose, was 83 and had lost over $100,000 to her grandson. Everyone told me I should just forgive him, she said. He's family, they said. But I'm family too, aren't I? Don't I matter? You matter, we all echoed. Another woman, Patricia, had been declared incompetent by her daughters and placed in a care facility despite being perfectly healthy. I escaped, she said, with a fierce smile. Literally escaped. Called a lawyer from a borrowed phone. Got the guardianship overturned. Now my daughters don't speak to me. and I've never been happier. We laughed at that, not because it was funny, but because it was true. Sometimes losing toxic family members felt like winning. I shared my story, all of it, including the parts that made me look naive or weak. The years I'd spent not seeing what was obvious. The times I'd excused bad behavior because I didn't want to believe my own children could hurt me. The shame of having to defend my competence in court. When I finished, Rose reached over and squeezed my hand. You fought back. Not everyone does. Some of us just disappear. I almost did, I admitted. But you didn't. That's what matters. That night, I made a decision. I called Rachel and told her I wanted to write a formal victim impact statement for Michael's sentencing hearing. She was surprised. Are you sure? You don't have to face him again. I know, but I want to. I want him to hear what he did, not to the idea of me, but to me as a person. I want it on record. Okay, we'll prepare something. I spent the next week writing, not in anger, though there was plenty of that, not in bitterness, though I had every right, but in clear, unflinching honesty about what it feels like to be erased by the people who are supposed to love you most. The sentencing hearing was scheduled for early December. I wore the same navy suit I'd worn to the guardianship hearing, my armor, my proof that I was still standing. Michael sat at the defendant's table, thinner than before, his expensive suit hanging loose. He didn't look at me when I entered. His attorney, a different one now, younger and cheaper, looked exhausted. The judge asked if I wanted to give my statement. I stood, holding my papers, and walked to the podium. Your Honor? I began, my voice steady. My name is Sarah Elizabeth Parker. I'm 72 years old. I was an elementary school teacher for 31 years. I've been a widow for 11 years. I'm the mother of 3 children, one of whom is sitting before you today. I looked at Michael. He stared at the table. What my son did wasn't a momentary lapse in judgment. It was a calculated, years-long campaign to take control of my life, my assets, and my autonomy. He forged my signature. He stole my money. He manipulated medical professionals. He coordinated with his siblings to have me declared incompetent so they could sell my home and split the proceeds. I paused, gathering myself. But what hurt most wasn't the fraud or the theft. It was the erasure. He stopped seeing me as his mother and started seeing me as an obstacle. I became inconvenient, burdensome, an asset to be liquidated. And when I resisted, he tried to convince the world, and maybe himself, that I was too mentally compromised to understand my own life. My voice cracked slightly. I raised him. I sacrificed for him. I loved him unconditionally. And he tried to steal my identity, my independence, and my dignity. That's not financial crime. That's betrayal at the deepest level. I looked at the judge. I don't know what the appropriate sentence is for destroying your mother's sense of safety and trust. But I know he needs to understand that what he did was wrong. Not unfortunate, not a misunderstanding, but deeply, profoundly wrong. And I need the world to understand that elderly people aren't disposal assets. We're human beings who deserve respect, autonomy, and basic human rights, regardless of our age or relationship to people who want our money. I folded my papers. Thank you for listening. The judge sentenced Michael to 18 months in prison, with possibility of parole after 6 months, plus restitution of all stolen funds and mandatory counselling. It wasn't harsh by some standards, but it was something. Accountability, consequences, public acknowledgement that what he'd done was criminal, not just unfortunate. As they led Michael away, he looked at me once. I couldn't read his expression. Regret? Anger? Shame? Maybe all of them. Maybe none. I looked back without flinching. Then I turned and walked out of that courtroom into bright December sunshine. Carol was waiting by her car. "How do you feel?" "Lighter," I said, like I set something down that I've been carrying for years. "What now?" "Now I live," I said simply. "On my terms. For myself." We drove to the travel agency that afternoon. I booked a 2-week trip to the Grand Canyon, Sedona, and Santa Fe. Carol booked the same trip. We'd leave in March, when the weather was perfect, and my new life had had time to settle into something real. That night, I sat in my living room, legally and spiritually mine, and made a list of everything I wanted to do now that I was free. Travel, write, garden, learn to paint, volunteer with organizations helping elderly people navigate family financial abuse, spend time with people who actually enjoyed my company instead of tolerated my existence, live deliberately instead of apologetically. The house settled around me with familiar creaks and sighs. I'd fought for this space, this autonomy, this right to exist on my own terms. And I'd won. Not perfectly, not without scars, but completely. I thought about all the women in my support group, all the people who disappear quietly into manipulated oblivion because they're too tired or too conditioned to fight back. I thought about younger women who might face this in their own futures, who might need to know it's possible to survive and rebuild. So I started writing, not just for legal records or victim statements, but the whole story. What manipulation looks like, how gaslighting works, what it feels like to be erased slowly, gently, by people who claim to love you, how to recognize the signs, how to fight back, how to choose yourself even when it costs everything. I wrote late into the night, and for the first time in decades, I felt purposeful. Not because I was serving someone else's needs, but because I was honoring my own truth. The next morning, I woke early and made coffee. Sun streamed through windows I'd opened wide, letting fresh air replace years of stagnant control. I walked through my house, my home, touching walls I'd fought for, standing in spaces I'd reclaimed. I thought about sending a Christmas card to my children, then decided against it. Maybe someday we'd find a way back to each other, but not through forced traditions or obligatory gestures. If they wanted a relationship with me, they'd have to see me first, really see me as a person, not a function or an asset. Until then, I had my own life to live. I sat on the back porch with my coffee and watched the sun rise over the yard James and I had planted together. Birds sang in the old oak tree. Frost glittered on the grass. The world was waking up, and so was I. For 72 years, I'd lived according to other people's expectations. I'd been the good wife, the devoted mother, the selfless teacher. I'd made myself small to make others comfortable. I'd apologized for taking up space. Not anymore. Now I was Sarah, just Sarah. Whole, imperfect, free. And that was more than enough. I raised my coffee cup to the morning sky, a toast to survival, to dignity, to the fierce, quiet strength it takes to choose yourself when everyone else wants you to disappear. I'd been quiet long enough. Now I was living out loud, on my terms, in my home, in my life. And it felt like coming home after a lifetime of being lost.